For the Arizona Cardinals, the worst quarterback since 1990 is Josh Rosen. And this one is a special kind of brutal, because Arizona didn't just miss, they missed loudly. Rosen was a first-round, top 10 pick drafted to be the face of the franchise, the guy who would finally end the Cardinals' revolving door of quarterbacks. He wasn't sold as a project, he was sold as NFL-ready, polished, smart, and safe. But the second he hit the field, it was obvious. Rosen looked like he was playing a different sport. His pocket awareness was shaky, his timing was late, and his throws under pressure were the kind of passes that turn into interceptions before the camera even finishes panning. The defining moment wasn't a single game. It was the constant feeling that Arizona's offense was doomed the moment the ball was snapped. And the fallout? Arizona dumped him after one season and drafted Kyler Murray immediately, making Rosen one of the fastest franchise quarterback failures in modern NFL history. That's not just a bust, that's an organizational panic button.
For the Atlanta Falcons, the worst quarterback since 1990 is Joey Harrington. And if you watched him play in Atlanta, you know exactly what I mean. He looked like a man who didn't trust his own arm. Harrington was a former high draft pick, and the Falcons hoped they were getting a reclamation project, a quarterback who could settle down, rediscover his rhythm, and become a competent starter. Instead, they got a quarterback who played like every throw might end his career. His accuracy came and went, his decision-making collapsed under pressure, and Atlanta's offense regularly felt like it was operating with a handbrake on. The defining moments were those games where the Falcons would go entire quarters without looking like they had a plan. And the fallout wasn't a franchise reset, but it was a reminder that Atlanta needed a real quarterback, not a maybe he'll be okay quarterback.
For the Baltimore Ravens, it's Kyle Boller, and Ravens fans still talk about this era like it was a curse. The worst part is the Ravens weren't a bad team. They were a great team, trapped inside an offense that couldn't function. Boller was a first-round pick, drafted as the missing piece to a championship-level roster, but he never became anything close to that. His accuracy was wildly inconsistent, his reads were slow, and when the pocket collapsed, he didn't step up, he panicked. The defining moment for Boller is basically every game where Baltimore's defense held an opponent to 13 points, and the Ravens still lost. That's the kind of quarterback play that wastes Hall of Fame-level defensive talent. The fallout was years of frustration and missed opportunities, until the Ravens finally decided they'd rather gamble on a new direction than live in quarterback purgatory forever.
For the Buffalo Bills, the worst quarterback since 1990 is J.P. Lossman, and he represents an era where Buffalo just couldn't stop stepping on the same rake. Lossman was drafted with the idea that he'd be the future. He had arm strength, he had mobility, and he had the maybe he'll develop energy. But when the lights came on, he never became a quarterback who controlled games. His decision-making was erratic, his accuracy disappeared at the worst times, and the Bills' offense regularly felt like it was surviving instead of attacking. The defining moments were the turnover-heavy performances, where Buffalo's defense would keep them alive, only for Lossman to hand the game away. The fallout was the continuation of Buffalo's quarterback wilderness. Years of instability, wasted seasons, and a franchise stuck searching for a real answer.
For the Carolina Panthers, it's Jimmy Clausen, and this is one of those situations where the tape is almost painful to watch. Clausen entered the league with college hype and the expectation that he could become a starter, but when he got his shot, he looked completely overmatched. He didn't have the arm to threaten defenses, he didn't have the pocket presence to survive pressure, and he didn't have the playmaking ability to compensate when things broke down. The defining moment wasn't a highlight, it was the weekly reality that Carolina's offense looked like it was trying to move the ball through wet cement. And the fallout was enormous. Clausen's failure helped push the Panthers into position to draft Cam Newton, which changed the entire future of the franchise. So in a weird way, Clausen was so bad, he accidentally helped Carolina win the lottery.
For the Chicago Bears, the worst quarterback since 1990 is Cade McNown. And Bears fans don't just remember him, they remember the disappointment. McNown was a first-round pick, drafted with the hope that Chicago had finally found the guy who could end the quarterback misery. But instead, McNown became another painful reminder that the Bears and quarterbacks just don't mix. He was inaccurate, turnover-prone,
and inconsistent, and the offense never felt like it had leadership at the position. The defining moments were the games where Chicago would be hanging around, until McNown would throw a back-breaking interception and kill the entire vibe. The fallout was more of the same. The Bears stayed trapped in the endless cycle of draft a QB, hope, suffer, repeat.
For the Cincinnati Bengals, it's Akili Smith. And this is not just a Bengals disaster, this is an all-time NFL draft horror story. Smith was taken extremely high, with the expectation that he'd be the franchise cornerstone. Cincinnati thought they were drafting the future. What they actually drafted was a quarterback who looked like he was trying to process the NFL through dial-up internet. His reads were slow, his accuracy was inconsistent, and his production was almost non-existent. The defining moment is honestly the entire tenure, because it never clicked, not once. And the fallout was brutal. The Bengals wasted years, lost credibility, and missed opportunities to rebuild properly. Smith didn't just fail, he dragged the franchise into quicksand.
For the Cleveland Browns, the worst quarterback since 1990 is DeShone Kizer. And yes, Cleveland has had so many quarterback disasters that this is a competitive category. But Kizer stands out because he was given the full season, the full responsibility, and the results were historically ugly. Kizer was a second-round pick with physical tools, and the Browns convinced themselves they could develop him into something. Instead, he became the quarterback of the 0-16 season. Turnovers, sacks, bad reads, forced throws, every week felt like a new way to lose. The defining moments were those games where Cleveland would show signs of life, and then Kizer would commit one catastrophic mistake that crushed everything. The fallout wasn't just another bad season. It was one of the most infamous years any NFL team has ever endured.
For the Dallas Cowboys, the worst quarterback since 1990 is Quincy Carter, and this one represents the chaos of the post-dynasty years. Dallas was desperate to find the next guy after Aikman, and Carter was drafted as a high-upside gamble. He had athleticism, he had a big arm, and he had the kind of raw talent that makes teams talk themselves into dreams. But on Sundays, it didn't translate. Carter was inconsistent, turnover-prone, and rarely looked like he had command of the offense. The defining moments were the games where Dallas would be competitive early, and then Carter would unravel with mistakes that turned tight contests into losses. The fallout was the Cowboys staying stuck in that awkward era where they weren't rebuilding, but they weren't truly competing either.
For the Denver Broncos, it's Paxton Lynch. And this is where the Broncos' quarterback nightmare really began. Lynch was a first-round pick, drafted to be the successor after Peyton Manning, and Denver believed they were getting a big-bodied, modern quarterback with arm strength and mobility. But from the moment he stepped on the field, it was clear he wasn't ready. His mechanics were sloppy, his reads were slow, and his presence in the pocket looked more like survival than leadership. The defining moments were those games where Denver's defense would keep them alive, and Lynch would still fail to capitalize. And the fallout? Denver entered the quarterback wilderness, a revolving door of desperation, short-term fixes, and wasted defensive talent.
For the Detroit Lions, the worst quarterback since 1990 is Joey Harrington. And the tragedy here is that Detroit genuinely believed he could be the answer. Harrington was drafted high with franchise expectations, and for a while, fans tried to convince themselves it was going to work. But the Lions were bad, the roster was unstable, and Harrington's confidence slowly crumbled in real time. His accuracy would vanish under pressure, his decision-making became hesitant, and the offense never developed an identity. The defining moments were those games where Detroit would fall behind early, and Harrington simply couldn't rally them back. The fallout was a franchise stuck in rebuild mode, and Harrington became one of the faces of Detroit's long stretch of quarterback disappointment.
For the Green Bay Packers, it's DeShone Kizer. And the reason this stands out is because Green Bay almost never experiences quarterback misery. The Packers went from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers, which is basically the NFL equivalent of winning the lottery twice. But when Rodgers went down, Kizer stepped in. And the difference was like going from a Ferrari to a shopping cart with one broken wheel. Turnovers, bad reads, missed throws, and stalled drives. It was chaos. The defining moments were those games where Green Bay's offense looked powerless, and fans realized just how much elite quarterback play had been covering up everything else. The fallout wasn't long-term,
but it was a rare reminder that even the most stable franchises can look fragile without their superstar. For the Houston Texans, the worst quarterback since 1990 is David Carr. And this one is almost heartbreaking because it wasn't just Carr failing, the franchise failed Carr. Houston drafted him first overall as the face of a brand new organization. The expectations were enormous. He was supposed to be the guy who built the Texans from scratch. But the offensive line was a disaster, and Carr got hit so often it looked like a weekly punishment ritual. As sacks piled up, the pressure broke his timing, and the constant punishment destroyed his development. The defining moments weren't one interception or one bad throw. It was the repeated image of Carr getting buried in the backfield. The fallout was a franchise that ruined its first franchise quarterback and lost years trying to recover.
For the Indianapolis Colts, it's Curtis Painter, and Colts fans still remember this era like a fever dream. When Peyton Manning went down, Indianapolis needed someone, anyone, to keep the team afloat. Painter was thrust into the starting role, and the results were disastrous. The offense collapsed, drives died instantly, and the Colts went from playoff team to bottom feeder almost overnight. The defining moments were the repeated losses, where Indianapolis looked completely helpless on offense. But the fallout had a twist. The Colts were so bad, they landed the first overall pick and drafted Andrew Luck, meaning Painter's disastrous season indirectly set up the franchise's next era.
For the Jacksonville Jaguars, it's Blaine Gabbert. And this is one of those picks that never recovered from the first impression. Drafted in the first round as the supposed future of the franchise, Gabbert never looked comfortable. He developed a reputation for panicking in clean pockets, checking down early, and playing scared of contact. His footwork was frantic, his reads were slow, and the offense never felt like it had confidence in him. The defining moments were those games where Jacksonville's passing attack felt like it didn't exist. The fallout was years of quarterback instability and wasted seasons where the Jaguars couldn't climb out of irrelevance.
For the Kansas City Chiefs, it's Tyler Palko. And unlike many names on this list, this wasn't a first-round disaster. It was a desperation nightmare. Palko started games during a period where Kansas City didn't have a real plan at quarterback, and it showed. The offense couldn't stretch the field, drives routinely stalled, and turnovers came at the worst times. The defining moments were those low-scoring games where it felt like the Chiefs needed a miracle just to reach 17 points. The fallout was that Kansas City had to reset quickly, and eventually they built toward the stability that would later define the franchise.
For the Raiders, it has to be Jamarcus Russell, and honestly, this is one of the most infamous quarterback busts in NFL history. Drafted first overall, Russell had the kind of arm talent that made scouts drool. The Raiders believed they had their franchise savior. Instead, they got a quarterback who never matched the NFL's demands. His conditioning was questioned, his preparation was questioned, and his on-field performance was brutally inconsistent. His accuracy was unreliable, his decision-making was erratic, and the offense never developed. The defining moments were the games where Russell would miss routine throws that even backup quarterbacks hit. The fallout was catastrophic. The Raiders lost years, lost credibility, and Russell became a permanent warning sign for drafting based on arm strength alone.
For the Chargers, it's Ryan Leaf, and this is one of the most legendary quarterback collapses ever. Drafted second overall right after Peyton Manning, Leaf was expected to be a superstar. Instead, he became a disaster on and off the field. His stat lines were ugly: turnovers, low completion rates, terrible decision-making. But what really defined Leaf was the chaos: sideline blow-ups, leadership issues, and a complete lack of stability. The defining moments weren't just interceptions. They were the moments where Leaf looked like he was unraveling in real time. The fallout was years of damage control and rebuilding for the Chargers.
For the Rams, it's Keith Null. And if you watched those Rams teams, you already know how bad it got. Null was thrown into action during one of the darkest eras of the franchise, and the quarterback play felt borderline non-competitive. Accuracy issues, turnovers, stalled drives, it was a weekly struggle just to look functional. The defining moments were those games where the Rams' offense looked like it couldn't execute basic NFL concepts.
The fallout was continued rebuilding, and the franchise eventually needing a complete identity reset.
For the Miami Dolphins, it's Cleo Lemon, and Lemon became the symbol of Miami's quarterback wilderness. He wasn't drafted to be the savior, but the fact that he was starting games at all told you everything about where the Dolphins were as a franchise. The offense lacked explosiveness, the passing game rarely threatened defenses, and Miami often looked stuck in survival mode. The defining moments were those low-scoring losses, where the Dolphins couldn't keep up with modern offenses. The fallout was years of searching for a true quarterback solution, with constant resets and false starts.
For the Vikings, it's Christian Ponder, and this one is painful because Minnesota desperately wanted him to be the answer. Drafted in the first round, Ponder was supposed to stabilize the position. Instead, inconsistency defined his career. He struggled reading defenses, struggled pushing the ball downfield, and rarely looked like he could carry the offense. The defining moments were the games where Minnesota's defense and running game kept them alive, and Ponder still couldn't close. The fallout was Minnesota being stuck in that frustrating middle ground. Good enough to compete, but never good enough to truly threaten because quarterback play held them back.
For the Patriots, the worst quarterback stretch since 1990 is the 2020 version of Cam Newton, and the reason this stands out is because New England isn't supposed to look lost. This wasn't MVP Cam from Carolina. This was Cam in a new system with diminished arm strength and a roster that didn't have the weapons to help him. The passing game was inconsistent, turnovers were costly, and the offense felt nothing like the Patriots' dynasty machine. The defining moments were the games where New England simply couldn't throw the ball effectively in obvious passing situations. The fallout forced the Patriots into a reset, proving how quickly even the most stable dynasty can crumble once the quarterback situation collapses.
For the Saints, it's Aaron Brooks, and this one is defined by inconsistency that could make you lose your mind. Brooks had flashes of talent. He had games where he looked like a legit starter, but then he'd follow it up with a performance full of baffling interceptions and momentum-killing mistakes. The defining moments were those throws where you could almost hear Saints fans collectively scream, "Why?" The fallout was that New Orleans never found true stability until Drew Brees arrived and completely transformed the franchise.
For the Giants, it's Dave Brown, and this era is a reminder of how quickly a franchise can fall into quarterback mediocrity. Brown was expected to develop into a long-term starter, but instead his tenure was defined by turnovers and an offense that couldn't sustain anything consistently. The defining moments were the games where the Giants' defense would keep things close, and Brown would still make the mistake that swung the outcome. The fallout was years of searching for stability, a slow grind back toward relevance.
For the Jets, it's Zach Wilson, and this is one of the most painful quarterback experiences in modern NFL history. Drafted second overall, Wilson was supposed to change everything. The Jets were building a young roster, and they believed they finally had their franchise quarterback. But on the field, Wilson struggled with accuracy, processing speed, and pocket awareness. The defining moments were those games where the Jets' defense played well enough to win, and Wilson simply couldn't do his part. And the fallout was brutal. The Jets had a roster ready to compete, and quarterback play wasted it, forcing yet another reset and another chapter of Jets heartbreak.
For the Eagles, it's Kevin Kolb, and this one is the story of a quarterback who was supposed to be the next guy, but never got there. Kolb was drafted and groomed as a potential successor, and when he got his opportunity, there were flashes. But injuries, inconsistency, and the inability to seize control of the job derailed everything. The defining moments were the moments he wasn't on the field, because the best ability in the NFL is availability, and Kolb never had enough of it. The fallout was Philly pivoting quickly, ultimately leading them down a different path entirely.
For the Steelers, it's Kent Graham, and this stands out mostly because Pittsburgh almost never has quarterback disasters. The Steelers usually maintain stability, even when the starter goes down. But Graham's performances were inefficient, turnover-prone, and flat-out underwhelming. The defining moments were those games where the Steelers' offense couldn't generate rhythm, couldn't sustain drives, and looked completely stuck. The fallout was short-lived, but it reinforced how rare it is for Pittsburgh to look helpless at quarterback, and how ugly it can be when they do.
For the 49ers, it's Jim Druckenmiller, a first-round pick drafted to be the heir after Steve Young. Think about that pressure. San Francisco believed they were drafting the future. But Druckenmiller never looked ready. His accuracy was inconsistent, his confidence was shaky, and the offense never felt like it belonged to him. The defining moments were his brief appearances, where it was obvious he couldn't run an NFL offense at the level required. The fallout was a missed opportunity that forced the 49ers to scramble for stability instead of smoothly transitioning from one era to the next.
For Seattle, it's Dan McGuire. And this one is a classic example of a franchise drafting a quarterback based on size and hoping everything else would follow. McGuire was a first-round pick, and the Seahawks believed they were getting a long-term starter. But he never developed. His release was slow, his reads were inconsistent, and his accuracy didn't hold up. The defining moments were those games where Seattle's offense looked like it was stuck in the mud. The fallout was Seattle continuing to spin its wheels until the franchise finally found better quarterback direction later.
For the Buccaneers, it's Josh Freeman, specifically the collapse version, because early Freeman had real promise. But when things went bad, they went really bad. Turnovers exploded, decision-making cratered, and Tampa Bay's offense became chaotic. The defining moments were those games where Freeman would start cold, make one mistake, and then spiral into a disaster performance. The fallout was Tampa hitting reset again, moving on quickly and continuing the long search for stability until later years.
For the Titans, it's Jake Locker, and this is the story of a quarterback who looked like he should have worked. Drafted in the first round, Locker had athleticism, toughness, and the physical tools to become a dynamic starter. But injuries and inconsistency destroyed the dream. He couldn't stay on the field long enough to develop, and when he did play, the production was uneven. The defining moments were the games where Locker would flash potential, only to disappear again due to injury. The fallout was Tennessee having to reset once more and keep searching for the answer.
For Washington, the worst quarterback since 1990 is Heath Shuler, and this one is pure draft heartbreak. Washington drafted Shuler third overall, expecting a franchise savior. They didn't want a decent starter. They wanted a superstar. Instead, they got a quarterback who struggled with accuracy, struggled reading defenses, and turned the ball over far too often. The defining moments were the repeated benchings, the repeated failures, and the clear realization that Washington had invested everything into the wrong guy. The fallout wasn't just one bad season. It was the beginning of Washington's long-running quarterback identity crisis, a cycle of desperation and instability that lasted for decades.